Thanks so much, Kim. How's the audio here?
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Excellent. And I have you, Phil, which is wonderful. I'm not going to go into too much detail about myself. You know where I work. I'm here with the rest of the community to help drive out and really tease out our whys. Phil, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words about yourself, but I suspect as we kind of dig into our chat, maybe people get to know you.
Yeah. Happy to, Larysa, and I'll keep it short as well. And thank you for everybody for inviting me as well. It's a pleasure to be here on what is, crazily a virtual stage. But I think it was Kim said earlier, sometimes the virtual stage is a little bit easier than the real stage. So I don't actually mind that from a logistics perspective. But no, my background is I'm a procurement professional the last 20 years. Worked in a number of different companies from Ford Motor Company, Pfizer, Chiquita, a financial services company, across direct and indirect procurement. I was really fortunate earlier in my career to become a head of international procurement fairly early. But I decided to go onto the service provider side and joined a company who were involved in procurement outsourcing. Did that for a little while. We got bought by Accenture, hung around Accenture for a couple of years, and then went and set my own business up called the Art of Procurement. And in doing that, the introvert in me was thinking, how do I have a new business? How am I going to get to meet people and network? Maybe I'll start a podcast because I can still do that from the comfort of my own home, rather than going out and standing on front of the stage at events. And it kind of took a life of its own. So today I have a business that focuses on podcast and media kind of things, learning and development in the procurement space, and helping procurement folks at an organizational level really transform their capabilities. So just been fortunate to be around the profession that I love for the last 20 years.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks. And thank you to the committee, our President Preeti, for the opportunity to share this time to talk about the future of procurement with Phil. Preeti, your wonderful welcome, and in the rise of RBG's wake, I'd like to give an extended thanks to those of the male gender who are here supporting us and bringing our leadership forward and accepting us as equals and superiors when necessary. So continued thanks there. And Phil, we've been talking about a fireside chat, how to make it warm and cozy, and
without the fires.
Well, I'm going to confess to you and everyone here, I put slippers on for the occasion. So I'm a little toasty over here.
I'm here in Florida, so I'll just open the window.
There you go. There you go. And, Anu's message was so uplifting and made me feel so powerful as a woman. But I hate to start things off on a sad note, but I'm a woman of figures, and I must begin with some facts from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We start with a 7% decline in procurement jobs expected and projected through 2029. I'm hoping you can tell us what the future of procurement looks like from your perspective, how the discipline is evolving, and what the next steady state might look like.
Sure. I'm going to start by saying to not expect a steady state. I think that the profession as the world around us is going to continue to evolve. And something that was said earlier about kind of change and status quo and challenging the status quo. I mean, I think we all have to be prepared for the fact that whether it's in our profession, whether it's the broader businesses that we work for, there's not really a steady state anymore. And what does that mean for procurement? Procurement's an interesting intersection. So we have, on one hand, you have all this technology that is becoming, that's available and that's becoming more available to our organizations to do some of the things that perhaps we do in our day-to-day work. Or it can actually help us be more impactful in our day-to-day work. And it's kind of, that's the crossroads. Are we going to let it replace us, or are we going to let it enable us? And the answer to that question is really what's going to happen with the profession. And that's something that, there's a lot that we're going to dig into, I think, today in terms of thinking around that. But that's really how I see things. I think procurement has the opportunity to really be a lot more impactful in the way that we support our businesses, the way that we align ourselves with what our businesses need. But it's on us to make that happen. We can't expect that that's going to happen for us. because if we do, then that's when technology replaces us rather than supports us. Now, my vision for a future of procurement, given what I said with the technology, I see that there is a possibility that procurement is going to be a smaller function, as the labor statistics show, in 10 years' time than what it is today. I think more importantly, the jobs are going to be different. So whereas today, we have a lot of them in terms of numbers of jobs are focused on some of the things that are more traditional from a procurement perspective. And when I say traditional, it's things like, running an RFP process, or, doing a lot of data and analytics, things that take a lot of time up, and that's kind of what requires a lot of people in some regards. If you think about things like that being automated in 10 years' time, then what that leaves is the ability for us to really be playing at a higher level within our organizations, where we're taking the information, the data that's been generated from all these different systems, and we're using it to actually be, to drive business decisions.
Let's talk about that next level, because our conference participants should really be encouraged to know that New Jersey is the top paying state for procurement jobs in the nation. But apparently women only make up a mere third of line managers and have less representation up the management chain. And we're reported to hold only 25% of category management positions and a slim third of buyer positions, indicating a higher female representation down the management chain. What do you think this next level of procurement job looks like?
Yeah, and I wish those statistics weren't like they are. That caused a lot of mindset, and I think there's a lot still in the profession of people hiring people that look like them, which is a travesty, as we've talked about, at the beginning of the event. Now, in terms of what that means in terms of the procurement as a function, like I'm a big believer that the hierarchy of procurement is going to flatten. So, because if you think about the roles, the role is going to be a lot more of a consultative role. And there's not necessarily going to be all the different steps of a procurement ladder. There's going to be a lot more roles of where you're kind of taking a relationship, an advisory, a consultative approach, and letting the business do procurement on their own with your help. So I don't think we're going to have that hierarchy in the future when it comes to, what are the stats at this level and that level and that level, because I don't think some of those levels are really going to exist. When it comes to what those roles are, I think that it's probably not a popular opinion, but the technical skills that we all learned when we got into procurement are going to be less relevant. So when I say traditional skills, it's running the sourcing processes, it's doing the negotiation, it's the category management 101, the stuff that is more that we expect everybody in procurement knows, and that's what we're all taught on, and that's what our organizations often train us on. Those are less important. What's going to be more important is the relational side of procurement, and actually being able to connect and being able to empathize. Because ultimately you can have all the information in the world, and this technology, the new technology that we'll get will give us even more information. But if you can't persuade people and influence people with it, it doesn't really matter. So that's where our jobs are going to go. That's what the focus is going to be. And that just means that we're going to need to focus on different skills, which I think is an opportunity, because it gets out of the whole idea of, well, this is what a procurement person has been for the last 20 years or 30 years or whatever. And it gives an opportunity for those that have a lot more diverse skill sets and who are able to build a lot closer relationships, because that's where, to me, the future of procurement is.
So that sounds like procurement professionals are really going to have to think and act differently to bring value. Some recent procurement strategies include cost reduction and cost recovery due to COVID-19. But tell us, what are the procurement forecasts and insights can we share with our conference members today?
Yeah, we're doing an event next week in the procurement space. It's going to run over a couple of days. And as part of that event, we've been surveying a lot of the procurement executives who are going to show up. And we have about 700 folks registered, and we have about 400, 500 who have filled in some additional questions. And one of the questions that we asked was around, what's your primary objective? And, you know, being a traditional procurement person, I anticipate that everybody's going to answer that question in two ways: either save money or secure supply, given where we are right now. What really surprised me is that actually the majority of respondents said our role is to enable the growth of the business. It's not to cut costs. You know, cost savings was number two, but the securing supply was down at, I think, maybe number three or number four. So where at the beginning of this pandemic, we were all kind of running around like headless chickens, trying to do what we could to make sure that our businesses had what they needed to get through the next month or the next couple of months, we've really changed. And I've been surprised to see how much it's changing towards growth as opposed to just cost savings. And because that requires, again, that different skill set. And that's really interesting to me, because when I think about it, ties into the future of procurement again. You know, we have this great opportunity. It's hard to talk about what's happening in the world right now as an opportunity, but you got to look at silver lining. So the silver lining of everything that's going on in our businesses right now is that procurement's never been as important or as impactful as what it is at the moment. So how we handle that is going to be another way that determines what direction we go in. You know, do we go in that and just try and help cut to the bone from a cost and expense perspective, like we traditionally perhaps have done, but in a way that meets a short-term goal, but might upset all the people around us. You know, if we do that, short-term results, but, you know, don't necessarily expect to be invited back at the table as soon as the business conditions change. Or are we going to go there and go with a longer-term view and a mindset that looks at how do we enable growth and how do we make sure we keep those relationships that we've got with our suppliers and strengthen those throughout all of this, while obviously getting the cost savings that we need. But you got to kind of do it in a different way than the traditional procurement approach. So you do it, this gives us the opportunity to really showcase what we can do as a profession versus perhaps what we have done in the past. And if we do it in a different way, if we're not just focusing on cut and upsetting stakeholders, and obviously we never deliberately upset a stakeholder, but it's a result of our objectives that we sometimes have, is to go and probably get a little bit too close to the bone in terms of taking cost out. If we're doing it more strategically in a way that partners a lot more closely with the business, I think that really sets us up for long-term success. So that's what I'm kind of advising everybody that I talk to. And those numbers in that survey really draw it out, that while everything's crazy, the majority of CPOs that are in our environment are still thinking about how do I help drive business value versus how do I just try and cut expenses to the bone.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in this world where many careers have stalled for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 is clearly a more recent catalyst of these career stalls, right? And this is demonstrated by unemployment rates that are knocking on 11% in New Jersey. But your ebook, It's Never Too Late, offers such inspiring guidance to break free from a stall. Can you share some of your tips to to those of us who might need a jump start?
Yeah, and you know, that ebook that I put together is based off my own experiences. You know, when I think about roles that I've been in, where, you know, it just kind of felt helpless. You're in the job. I think all of us in a role, when we move to somewhere else, you know, you kind of pass that point of no return. And when you pass the point of no return, that's when it feels the hardest, because you feel like you're not really going to be committing all of you to the role. You know, you kind of checked out in your mind while looking for something else. And, you know, I've been there and looked for something else, and then you take something because the grass is greener, and then you get there and the initial 6 or 12 months passes, and then you can kind of back to square one again. So I wanted to write something about, you know, reflecting on my experiences. You know, what could we do? Because careers stall, and they're often because you got bad bosses, you got working for bad companies, you're overworked, you're underworked, your skills don't match the needs of the job. So it's not a bad thing to feel like you got to cut and run. But I think the advice that I gave the most in that ebook was around that it's about personal fulfillment. Like, how are you actually, and this is what talks to the why, you know, how are you, what fulfills you in your job? And for most of us, it's funny, I had a conversation just before this with a former CPO who went out to set up her own business. And she was telling me, you know, she got to be a CPO. It was everything she ever dreamed of. And she got in the role and she realized that no amount of money is worth this. And she wanted to, build a better career for herself that wasn't the career path that she thought she was on. And that's kind of what I felt when I got into that role. And I thought, you know what? I aspired to this level. It wasn't really what I wanted, because I'd never really thought about what fulfilled me at work, what gave me happiness. I just thought about the title, and the money and having the office and all that kind of stuff. And you don't stop to think about what's important. So the thing that I really wanted to bring out when I wrote that was to kind of have look at yourself, do a self-assessment, essentially. Take a step back and think, what do I really want in a job? What's going to make me happy? How am I going to be fulfilled on a day-to-day basis? And if it's not what you're doing right now, there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's just a signal to start thinking about, how can I create a career that actually fulfills me, so that I'm going to be happy, all these hours that I put in at work. And the other thing that I said was about being a business of one. So thinking about yourself as a business rather than just an individual in a career. Because, when you think about a business, you think more often than not more long-term, perhaps a little bit more strategically about what it is that you want to do, where you want to go, what you say yes to, what you say no to, and brand yourself as that. So as you start branding yourself as that, you're starting to, go out on social media and share some opinions, or just start positioning yourself in the procurement community as yourself. So your what's the right way of saying it? Like your image and your brand isn't that of your company, it's of you as a person. Because then people will, you'll find the people that like you as a person, that want to work with you as a person, rather than looking at you as a job title. And those are where the really interesting opportunities come up.
I think that brings us to why we're here today, to really begin the journey to identify, explore, and cultivate our whys. And you've painted a really promising but very different picture of what the future of procurement looks like, Phil. I think these skill set expectations, market demands, third-party risk management, value delivery, they're all going to be very different, and the expectations are going to really be set higher. Do you have any, final thoughts on how our audience might be able to begin and realize and execute on their future? Or maybe we should start to take some questions?
Yeah, I'll say one thing, and then more than happy to take some questions. And there was actually a comment from Deborah about being authentic. That's so important. The beginning of my the podcasting journey, when I started to put that out there, the first I've been doing this for 5 years now. And the first couple of years, I would go in there and I would edit myself all the time, because I had this in my mind of what people should see and hear versus who I was. And I was creating this persona of somebody that didn't match with the person that I really was. And after a couple of years, I basically thought, screw it. I am who I am, and people are going to love it or they're going to hate it, and stop trying to be something that you're not. And it took me a long while to figure out that I should stop trying to pretend to be something that, wasn't me. So that authenticity, I just wanted to bring that out. So it's really, really important, because then that's when you don't feel like you're having to be something that somebody else or meeting somebody else's expectations. So that took me a while to realize, what can we do? I talked about self-assessment a little bit about, just looking at what motivates you. What is going to motivate you for the next few years, and does what you do today actually do that for you, or does it not? That's a sign to think about, looking at something like getting out of your current situation. But when you think about different job types in the future of procurement, what is it that interests you? Are you interested by continuing to find a role where you're doing more traditional procurement skills, like the negotiating, like the sourcing, the category management? Does a role where you're being more of a account executive almost for your stakeholders, that relational role, is that something that's interesting to you? Is helping to drive change and being a program lead, where you're bringing together all different elements of this ecosystem of talent and of technology, combining those, is that something that's interesting to you? There's certainly going to be different kinds of jobs that are going to attract different kinds of people, but starting to think about how, as our profession evolves, what sounds like it's interesting, then it allows you to put in place like a roadmap of, well, maybe I need to learn skill A, or maybe I need to learn skill B, or maybe I need to put myself in a position to have experience C, or whatever it looks like. And realize that it's the journey doesn't happen overnight. You know, it's just, you got to take small steps, and just feeling as though you're on the right track, just, I always found, inspires you to, you know, keep going. Because if you have too big expectations too quickly, which I've had in the past, you know, you're always going to be unhappy because you're not where you think you want to be. So it's just that small goals.
Thank you so much, Phil, for joining me in ISM today for this important event and sharing your insight and experience. Just as a quick reminder, the Art of Procurement will be hosting Mastermind Live next week, October 6th and 7th. More information can be found on LinkedIn and other social media channels. But Kathy, can you assess the Q&A channel and see if there are any questions for Phil at this time?
Sure. I just see a bunch of comments. I don't see any questions just yet. I love the honesty, and good to hear that changing your mind, making a shift in your career is okay and never too late.
Yeah, you know, it's, I just want to reiterate that you're in control, and that's, sometimes it doesn't feel like that. You know, sometimes it feels like you're in a situation that it's hard to get out of. But when you empower, this is my own personal experience, and obviously people have different experiences. And so I'm not to say that what's right for me is right for anybody else, but I felt that when I empowered myself with that, that was what gave me the opportunity to go and, you know, forge the path that I wanted to forge, rather than try and meet the expectations that everybody else had, or that I thought everybody else had for me.
If anybody has a question, put your question in the chat bar, and then this is the best time. Phil is here live.
So this isn't a question. This is Kim. I never physically met you, Phil, but I feel like I know you now. It's strange how our relationships and our connections cross. I mean, you brought up about the CEOs and how they're focusing more on those strengthening relationships instead of just saving money. And
yeah,
just over the past few months of being home, I've seen an increase in LinkedIn and conversations, and even, you know, across borders. And one of the connections that I found between you and I was John Hanson, who I met at another conference last year. And the similarities and connections that I find floor me. So building these relationships and building your own skills, I really enjoyed how you explained it. I can't wait to get your ebook. I did not know about your ebook, but John Hanson is in Canada, and he is connected in such a different way. For me, it's running, and I'm not this big time runner, but he tags me, he tags other people that you're going to hear in this conference, and then all of a sudden I knew Phil's name.
Yeah, he's tagging me as well.
Yeah, and Larysa mentioned that you would do this fireside chat, which we're so appreciative of, and I couldn't believe it, I knew your name. So
it's a really small world. Yes, you know, we're a small profession, and when we start sharing, you know, one of the things from a procurement perspective is we're taught that information is power, and we should never go and say anything or put anything out on social or be vulnerable, all those things, because, you know, maybe there's a supplier who's going to go and find that out and try and use it against me in a negotiation. You know, I think it's so powerful. We've got such a small community, and a community of people who want to help each other. And that's, as I started my journey, like John was one of the people who reached out to me and, you know, welcomed me into, showed what he was doing and helped me along the way. And, you know, from the outside, it looks like all of us doing different things, competing against each other. Behind the scenes, you know, we're all just trying to help each other. Because for all of us, the rising tide lifts all boats, and we just want to, you know, help the profession be stronger, so we all succeed as a result of it.
Okay, I do have a question. How do you, let me just get to the beginning of it, because she put in a couple things. Was helpful to hear the prediction about procurement professionals playing the role of consultant in the future. How do you think how do you think that should change how we work day to day, and what way we have always done it do we need to overcome it?
Yeah, I think one of the things what do we have to overcome of what we've always done? The first thing that comes to mind is process. Going and so often we go to stakeholders and say, this is the process that we're going to follow. We're here, we have this policy, we're going to go through these 7 steps. It kind of gives that feeling as though they exist to help us do our job, as opposed to us existing for them to be able to do their job. So I think that's just one big switch, is that we need to be a little bit more creative in helping them achieve their objectives, as opposed to, again, seeing their spend as a way for us to meet ours. From a how should it work from a day-to-day basis? I mean, I think that at least when I look now 5 years, 10 years, I mean, who really knows? But I would anticipate that the element of our job, which involves firefighting and being the one that's on call when folks have trouble and difficulty with suppliers, that's never going to change. We're always going to be kind of on deck, if you will, having somebody. We're going to be the ones that people come to when they have problems. But I think that it's working with a longer term perspective with our stakeholders while we're doing that, and carving out time to be able to do it is a way you can do that in your job. So even though it feels like really overwhelming all the time, that you just have no time in the day, and I completely get that, because that's what I always felt, you have to find ways to carve out time to think longer term and to have longer term conversations with your stakeholders, because that's really where you're going to make the difference. If what we're doing is we're coming and firefighting and running processes for them, that's all they're going to see that we have the ability to do. It's only when we come to them with insights, information, with ideas of what other people and other companies and our peers are doing that they may not have thought about themselves, or they may not know. That's where they're going to look up and say to us as a procurement professional, you know what, I think I can help. You can help me make better business decisions. And you have to carve out time to be able to at least, like I say, it can be a slow journey, but at least start to be able to create time to have those conversations and to do the research and build the connections, which allows you to then bring those insights in to have those conversations.
Thank you. I got another question. It would seem that women typically tend towards relationship building. How would you suggest women work to leverage those skills in a meaningful way to enhance their career?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's a really great point. And, I hate labels and, generalizations and all those things that come with it. But the fact is that when I talked about skill set and the future skill sets, then it's when you think about relational and empathy and all those things, I think they're more natural to women than they are to men. And so that does provide an opportunity to be thinking about, how can I move from that traditional, again, kind of procurement skill set to leveraging those different skills, because when you think about building relationships, it can be with suppliers, it can be with stakeholders, it's being more active in terms of listening than perhaps what, I would have done earlier in my career. And I think those are really powerful tools that you can use to really step into positions where it's about, you're kind of on the coal face, if you will, of a stakeholder relationship, because you've got all this kind of, all the crap that goes on behind the scenes that you don't want the stakeholder to see. You have the opportunity to kind of manage that behind the scenes so they don't see it, and you can portray a much brighter and it's like the account management you would do when I was at a consulting firm, for example. You don't want people to see what's going on behind the scenes. You just want them to feel like everything's going to be okay and you understand them and you are listening to them. I think there's a big opportunity to play that role.
We have a question from Ben. How have procurement professionals been able to successfully alter their roles and become value executives when many corporations have a traditional perception of the organization? Yeah. What types of pushback have you seen, and how have they overcome the challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, unfortunately, in some organizations, it's never going to happen because they're so ingrained in that way of thinking. And as much as it's sad to say that, you need some broader transformation to occur before you can even begin to address that in certain organizations. You know, in others, I think that I say it's on you in some way, because it goes back to like, how am I going to portray myself to the people around me? How am I going to think about how am I personally adding value to the stakeholders around me? You know, don't wait for your organization to come up with initiatives which say, we're going to focus on value beyond savings, and we're going to do supplier relationship management, and we're going to do this and the other. Because if you're waiting for your organization to do that, we might be waiting a while. And when we do, most of the stakeholders that we go and tell, hey, we're going to be relational now, roll their eyes and say, well, I heard that, you know, 3 years ago. And here we are again. So think about in your individual role and your individual sphere of influence, what can you do to, again, be having a conversation about what their real goals and objectives are, and how you can help influence and bring information, bring new suppliers, bring whatever it is to help them achieving their objectives. When you just have that conversation about them rather than you, I think that's a really powerful place to start. And that's what I would, you know, when I was doing it as a practitioner, I would always, my perspective was always that I'll worry about my goals. I'm going to worry about yours. And if I take care of you, then my goals will take care of themselves. And the other thing I would always coach people on was that, you know, assuming that you're still achieving and that your stakeholders are very happy with what you're doing for them, and it's not because you're getting out of the way and just letting them walk all over you, it's because you're adding value in different ways than saving money. Most organizations aren't going to fire somebody who misses their savings target if all of their stakeholders speak very highly of them. But I've seen many organizations fire their procurement teams that overachieved on their savings target because everybody hated them. And so I always just take that perspective. And I know that if I happen to be in a spot where that's not appreciated, that those experiences are going to count me well in the next role.
Well, thank you. We have time just for one more question. This one's from Lisa. You mentioned procurement shifting to more of consultative and strategic role in the future. How do you think young professionals, recent graduates, can enter into the procurement without as many foundational transitional procurement roles?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that I don't think anybody's figured out yet. And I think it's really relevant because we're basically taking away the career ladder. You know, I talked to a CPO in New York last year. I had a podcast with him as the CPO of S&P. And, you know, we had the same discussion because he doesn't have an answer for it either. You know, you think about our procurement, folks earlier in their careers going to come into procurement from outside. So they're going to have a background in marketing, or they're going to have a background in HR, or a background in whatever the category is. And then procurement just becomes the stop on a career journey where you're going to learn a little bit more, and you're coming in because you understand the category deeply, not because you understand procurement. And I think that's potential, but yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question, Lisa. It's one of those, like,
Phil, if I could jump in there a little bit, you know, I think one of the fundamentals that will always carry a procurement professional through is the data. The data will always carry you through, and a procurement professional early in his or her career needs to understand the fundamentals of who the vendor is, how much it means to the company, you know, how big that bread basket is. And I think that the younger generation of workers, I don't know what we call them these days because I'm just getting too bloody old, but whoever's coming in now has an edge over the lion's share of the folks on this call because they know technology. It's easier for them than it ever was for us. They're more attuned to what's out there. And they'll have edge when it comes to those tools that I think you were talking about that are replacing the transactional activities that for procurement professionals are sort of being pressed out of. So I think that there's an edge there. I think that there's an immediate way into the door there. And if they can understand the value points on the data, I think that that'll be a tremendous springboard.
For sure. You know, being technologically native is actually, it's more than just being able to use the technology. It's being able to understand how all the technology can connect to each other to create, you know, value that's far greater than the individual pieces of it. I know it's time to wrap up, but there's one question I just want to touch on it for 1 minute because it's a really important question. And it's around how can waste procurement help drive diversity and inclusion initiatives. You know, we're in really powerful positions to be able to try and influence our organizations around diversity and inclusion, and yet most of our companies only pay lip service to it. And, you know, and I know because I've been there as well and being responsible for these kind of initiatives. You know, at the end of the day, the business, it depends on the values of the business, but where the business doesn't necessarily have values that promote diversity and inclusion and, you know, think about that from a cost perspective, they're willing to pay more to have a more diverse and inclusive supply base, for example. It's on us as individuals. I mean, at the end of the day, it's on us as individuals to make the case and to be advocates. We've got to be advocates for the suppliers who are the diverse suppliers, because if we aren't, nobody else in the organization is. So as we build our strategies and our tactics and all those things, you know, be aware, be proactive in finding diverse suppliers to include in all your initiatives, but then be their advocate. Because I think that's really the only way that it's the only way that we can really have influence. All right. I guess we'll hand it back over. I'm not sure who to, but I want to thank everybody just for their time and for their questions. Thanks for inviting me.